Bonsoir tout le monde. Voilà, juste pour vous demander d'accueillir Andrea Zanderigo, qui vient de Milan, qui va nous parler principalement des projets de Baukuh, qui est une agence qu'il a fondée il y a 20 ans, avec Pier Paolo Tamburilli, avec Vittorio, voilà. Voilà, c'est la bande des rigolos italiens qui ont fait ça ensemble. Non, et ce qui est intéressant à savoir, c'est que c'est donc voilà, une agence un peu à géométrie variable qui a directement impliqué pas mal de personnes. C'est les mêmes personnes en fait, qui en parallèle avaient fondé le magazine San Rocco, dont vous avez probablement entendu parler, ou sinon on en reparlera, qui a été une revue comme ça très connue, qui s'est arrêtée maintenant, puisqu'elle avait, dès le premier numéro, elle était décidée sur un certain nombre de numéros, je ne sais plus combien. Ah, 15, voilà. La décision, c'est de dire on fait 15 numéros puis on arrête. Ils ont tenu parole. En parallèle de tout ça, voilà, l'agence se développait. Il y a eu pas mal de projets de concours, les agences un peu jeunes, expérimentales, et puis quelques bâtiments qui ont commencé à sortir de terre. Ça, je pense que tu vas nous en parler un peu plus. Et puis, Andrea a enseigné en parallèle à l'EPFL pendant tout un temps à Lausanne, là maintenant à Düsseldorf, et à Londres au Royal College of Art. Voilà, alors la conférence, elle sera en anglais. C'est le moment de pratiquer un peu votre anglais. Ça va être comme ça. C'est pas très compliqué. Il n'a pas un accent compliqué, donc tout va bien. Et puis après, il parle un peu tranquillement. Donc voilà. Et ensuite, on ira voir le bar. Je te laisse.
Okay. Good evening to everybody. I'm sorry, I have to speak in English. My French is really terrible, so here it is. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Cedric. Thank you, everybody. So I have quite a monumental lecture, but I will try to be quick and to shrink it down to an acceptable time. So maybe I put even... All right. So I would say there are two main themes that I will try to somehow to present the project through these two main themes. One, as you see, easy, public buildings. And because, I mean, it's now almost 20 years that we have this practice with a bizarre name, Baukuh. And we have noticed that somehow the idea of public was always a major driving force in our work. And in retrospect, I think a quite, let's say, a quite interesting discovery was at a certain moment starting to study this Giotto's microarchitectures. I mean, Giotto, I guess you might have heard about him. He's a famous, very famous, let's say, Italian artist, pre-Renaissance, and is basically facing a very new problem. So, as you might know, there's a new emerging figure, the bourgeois, the citizen. And Giotto is basically reusing fragments of the architectures he knew, like churches, palaces, whatsoever, the former powers, in order to stage, to enable public life. So you see these little, let's say, architectures, which are basically the minimum amount of architecture that you need in order to stage public life on the city. Why it's important nowadays to talk about public architecture? Because, of course, we notice an increasing tendency towards some forms of privatization or control. This is, for example, main station in Milan, which, with the problem of, let's say, terrorism, almost 7-8 years ago, they decided to put these gates. So one of the tropes of public buildings, so the grand station, as defined by 19th century, suddenly became a place where you cannot walk in unless you have a ticket. And this is, of course, partly a problem of society, but it's even partly a problem of creators, of, in our case, let's say architects. Because, of course, the art of 20th century has been obsessed with the idea of the self, no? So the self, which is, I mean, everybody likes David Bowie, I like it too. But, I mean, you see the title, no? There's Can't Help Thinking About Me. And it's not only pop art, mainstream art. It's even, let's say, high-end art, no? So, for example, Jeff Koons monumentalizing himself and his wife at the time, Cicciolina, Hungarian porn star, in the form of a classical sculpture. And, of course, if you then come to architecture, this kind of tendency, you know, has been, let's say, brought to the scene, no? Brought to the attention even of the mainstream world because of certain novels. For example, there's a movie coming from a famous novel, which is called The Fountainhead, in which, let's say, the architect, Gary Cooper, is sort of producing amazing architecture, which is sort of, you know, exiting out of his head, no, in his fantastic loneliness, no, and creative loneliness. And of course, I mean, if you remain in the States, there are alternative models, even, let's say, in the capitalistic regime. So, for example, a very important office at the turn of last century, no, so between 19th century and 20th century in the States, McKimmon and White, no? A trio. So there's already this idea of collaboration and an idea of architecture which is intensely public. It's made for the public and it's made as a collaborative act. And it's often based upon, let's say, the architecture of the past. So basically, McKimmon and White were traveling extensively around Europe, collecting books from the French Academy, etc., with surveys of Roman monuments, and then basically reusing that kind of architecture in order to produce public architecture in the States. This is the Grand Hall of Penn Station, demolished in the 60s, which is basically a scaled copy of the Caracalla Baths main space. And you see, at the time it was the biggest office in Manhattan, up to 120 people, which was insane for the 20s of last century. And of course, that kind of, let's say, tendency, weirdly enough, you can still trace it in the big corporate offices, like, for example, SOM. But the other topic, which again is recurring a lot in our production, which is here weirdly titled Universal History of Remaking. This is something we have been busy with in the last years, and I mean, maybe something's going to come out of it. Let's say, of course, it has to do with climate crisis and climate justice to an extent. You know that in many countries in Europe there are campaigns, no? Campaigns in order to stop demolitions, for example. This is in Germany, a brief moratorium, UK, retro first, sounds weird, but... and this is slowly proceeding towards, let's say, some form of institutionalization, whatever, you understood. Meaning that lately, a month ago, the Chamber of Architects in Germany issued a statement on their website which is basically, let's say, getting along together with the Abris moratorium, so with the stop demolitions, in saying that we shouldn't build anymore if we want to meet the targets, the emission targets. And that, as Lacaton Vassal would say, no, the best building is the building which is already there. Of course, this is quite problematic in cultural terms, because we were educated, at least we, I'm not sure you, but we were educated still in the long wave of a completely different, let's say, ideology, no? We were educated in the long wave of modernism. And modernism, of course, has or had a very, very, let's say, how to say, a very, very problematic relation with the past, no? Which is beautifully exemplified by the way, this amazing master plan by Le Corbusier, no? Plan au bout for Alger, in which, let's see if it works. Yeah, in which there is, I mean, there's a beautiful text by Manfredo Tafuri talking about this bridge, which is basically crossing the old city on top without touching it. No? So, and this distance, no, the distance between the new bridge and the old city is, by Tafuri at least, sort of an extremely meaningful distance. No, modernism is all about the tabula rasa, etc., etc., etc. I guess you all know it. And even the late modernism, for example, Carlo Scarpa in Palazzo Battellis, you still see that there is an impossible dialogue with the old. No? There's always a sort of critical distance between what was there and what we're going to do. And, I mean, of course, this is something entirely new. Because before modernism, and to a certain extent, we could say before the exploitation of fossil fuel, architecture was all about remaking, reusing, moving mass around the same place, no? And basically continuously inhabiting the very same structures. This is a quite evident sample, no? It's a Roman theater, Marcellus theater, on top of which, during the Renaissance, Peruzzi built a palace. But basically, you still see the theater below, etc. To a certain extent, we could even argue that one of the paradigms of modernism, because of its perfection, because of its absoluteness, is a case of remaking or reusing. As proved, by the way, by this great and slender, very small book by a guy called Carpenter, who talks about the Parthenon and shows how basically the Parthenon itself is some form of reshaping of what was already there, no? As you can see in this plan. You know, okay, it's a weird edition, but I really like the cover. To a certain extent, we have to accept, no, Latour's ideas, no, and enter in that way, no, so that we have never been modern. So you will see now some projects by us, some projects by other people, and hopefully it will make a bit of sense at the end of the story. It is the first project we did, meaning that it's the project we did in 2003. We won Europan 7 with that in Amsterdam, and it's the main reason we started the office. So Bakemaboert, from the name of that guy, Jaap Bakema, famous famous architect in the Netherlands in the post-war time. And the brief of the competition was proposing total demolition of the buildings. And I mean, social housing in the western part of Amsterdam with certain problems, asbestos, social problems, neglected public space, small types, etc. At the same time, when we went there, we thought, oh, that's quite nice. And we thought even that it was somehow a pity, if not a crime, to demolish everything and to start anew, no? Starting from tabula rasa. Because, let's say, Baukuh is that little square there, but it's part of a very homogeneous master plan designed by another guy called Cor van Esteren in the late 30s. No? So we thought we should really find a strategy to preserve most of the buildings. And what we did was basically this plan in which we kept 60% of the slabs, no? So these are the existing slabs, and we inserted a carpet of patio housing in order to reduce the amount of public space, which was apparently a problem, in order to inject new types while preserving the memory of the original neighborhood, while at the same time, to a certain extent, improving it, because the slabs were a bit too close, the ones to the other, and we thought, okay, maybe giving them more space would allow them to a certain extent, fulfill the promises, no, of modernism. And, okay, then we developed, let's say, the weird, very long, Gothic-like patio housing. You see a model here. The first tests, no, on the houses themselves. The integration between the carpet of patio housing, no, and so the new socle, the new base, and the slabs, and voila. I mean, it was, let's say, the master plan was approved, then the financial crisis came, everything was frozen, nothing happened there. Around the same years we did this project, another competition we won in Genova, another competition which was not realized. And I mean, it's one of the palaces of the so-called Strada Nuova, which has, I mean, it's a let's say, Haussmann operation in Genova. No? So you cut through the body of the city with a straight line, you do a bit of real estate with amazing palaces on the two sides. The palace object of the competition was this one, here in a drawing by Rubens, and it was the headquarters of the association of, let's say, shop owners, etc. No? The palace went through some transformations. No? So originally, this is the original plan with a garden in the back and then stairs to go down to the little square in the back. So original section. Then something happened and they built on top of the garden a second courtyard. So the section became this one. And they wanted to, let's say, to enlarge, to make a better library for the headquarters of this institution. And we decided to reestablish, let's say, the connection between the front, Strada Nuova, and the back, the garden. Basically removing one slab, which is that one, which was built in the 50s, and then getting light again into the courtyard. So these two elements were built in the 50s. And transforming, let's say, the second courtyard into the core of the little library. Here you see an early plan of the palace and a couple of views. We were talking about this universal history of remaking, and it's of course a long history, digging in the past. Bramante still in Milan, beginning of the Renaissance, struggling, let's say, to define the new language between the medieval language and the new one. Santa Maria presso San Satiro, which is this church, I guess you might know it. It should have had a cross plan, but there was no space, so there's a trompe-l'oeil inside here. But what we are looking at now is this. So there was another building, a church from the 8th century, a very more small circular pavilion, and at the time of Bramante it was collapsing. What Bramante did was building this circular wall, a massive new wall around it in order to contain the forces, and then he built, in order to balance the new wall and to get the new light of the Renaissance into the Paleo-Christian space, he put a big lantern on top, which is basically compressing the existing structures and stabilizing them towards the wall. And as such, you see that you have a completely new whole, which is basically reshaping, remaking what was there once. We have seen before, Palazzo Piccolomini by Peruzzi on top of Marcellus Theatre. You see the Aucun plan dictated by this pre-existing condition. And you see how, let's say, what was built basically 15 centuries after is coexisting with the old structures. And which was what, I mean, and this is a part which was redone in 20th century. I mean, remaking. At a certain moment, we started working in Belgium. It was a good moment for, let's say, a certain generation of European architects, because the Baumeister was, I guess, part of that scene. And we started doing competitions there and getting invited, etc. And the first one we did was this one in Antwerp, civic center out of a monastery, which was basically built at the beginning of 20th century. Next to the center, south of the zoo, close to the station, etc. So you see it there. A monastery which has a very little, let's say, not so many facades, so a small facade here, a small facade there. But at the same time, we thought, okay, in order to turn it into a civic center, we need to get literally people through, no? And we started thinking about the architectural tools to do so, no? And Passage came to mind. And we decided to basically demolish certain parts, no? Clean it up a bit. So we cleaned the courtyard and we decided to remove the facade. For two reasons. The facade was, I mean, not listed, was not a masterpiece, according to us, of course. And we thought that the only way, I mean, the population of the neighborhood is mostly either Muslims or Jewish Orthodoxies. So we thought, in order to get it functioning into this neighborhood, we need to, how to say, to make it look a bit less like a church. And then we decided indeed to, referring to that idea of the passage, to introduce, to forcefully introduce this idea of the passage into the building, next to the church, into the courtyard, and then back out on the other side. And then, let's say, we harmonized the size to the existing houses along the street. Here you see the passage, etc., etc. Model pictures, and exit on the other side. Another competition in Belgium soon after this one we won, and we are still dealing with it, super slow process, waiting for the money forever. It's a former seminar school, which is now a public school in a small village called Hoogstraten. And let's say the competition was for the renovation of this building. I guess we won because we told them that, yes, renewing the building was important, but what was important was to try making, let's say, a new hall, a new system out of a constellation of buildings which were built over the course of 120 years without having in mind a general idea of the campus. And we thought that the garden, the courtyard, needed little adjustments in order to be formalized and to become an effective public space. In a village in which there's no square, there's no Grotemarkt. So here is the master plan, and here the first attempts, let's say, to a model to understand how to correct the space, so how to redefine with the minimum amount of architecture the spatiality of this very long courtyard. And here is probably, let's say, 3% of the project that we managed to do so far, and now we are building the rest, but it will take time, which is basically the exterior accommodation, let's say, towards the main road. So we built this public space. There were flower beds here along the facade of the building, but the problem was that when the building was built, there was no traffic in the big road in front. Now it's full of traffic, and there was really a problem of, let's say, space for the students exiting the school. So here it is. Back to the universal history of remaking. And Michelangelo squeezing a church out of the ruins of Roman baths. And basically, he did very few operations. He opened a new door on this side towards the square. He painted everything white inside, and then the church was done. The Michelangelo part is the upper part. The lower part was then, during the Baroque, was further, let's say, embellished and decorated. Or again, Michelangelo and others dealing with Hadrian's mausoleum and turning it into a castle for the Pope. Basically building a castle on top of the mass of the existing mausoleum. This is a competition we lost, but somehow I still remember it with a lot of affection. So it's a small church in Hallesund, which is, let's say, a little town on the coast in Norway, and there, let's say, the first sketch was really this idea of the forest in a sort of recognizable, but at the same time ambiguous form emerging for the trees. And there was a program which was tiny but complex at the same time, no, with all the ancillary spaces of the church, of the parish. And we thought, okay, let's use the typical OMA strategy. So all the functions layered one upon the other, no, in order to create one big form. At the same time, we started looking, no, at, again, tropes of architectural representation, like the big stairs from Villa Malaparte in Capri, or this non-functioning, purely representational porch in a church by Schinkel in Berlin. And then other, let's say, issues about orders and doors, etc. And somehow the church was there with basically the program layered vertically, the Malaparte stairs, the Schinkels, bizarre non-existing porch, the double dome, and we built a model. We thought, okay, it was January. At the time we had the office in Genoa, we thought, okay, let's go to the mountains. Let's take some pictures of the model in the snow. And another project which is somehow very different, but at the same time extremely similar, a collaborative project with Kun Malvezzi. Again, a religious building for a big competition in Pristina, no? New central mosque in Pristina, part of this war of religions, which is still going on in the Balkans. We thought, okay, you know, it's the Balkans. We can do some sort of turbo folk mosque. And that was the plot, 4 or 5 kilometers from the very center of Pristina. And we thought, okay, let's use the same strategy, no? So everything layered out vertically. And we started digging into the history of, let's say, Ottoman mosques, but even some other kind of buildings now, which we are trying to create this sort of clockwork, no, centralized clockwork, and suddenly, let's say, the project was there with the parking lot, with all the functions layered, and you see it here visually. So you see the parking, you see the shopping, you see the sun, so the courtyard of the mosque, which here becomes a space in between, let's say, the pedestrian, no, the everyday activities, and then the sacred space of the mosque above. The bottom of the mosque became the cultural center, the house of the imam, the classrooms, etc. And then, let's say, the mosque itself on top with all the ancillary spaces around. And, of course, it's producing this sort of monster section. We really didn't understand the competition here. And there was, I mean, the winning project, it's like, you know, a mosque from 16th century in Istanbul, just built like at, I don't know, Disney World. Troubling appearance, decoration of the drum, decoration of the ceiling, the low dome above the sun, no, above the courtyard. And the interior with the big inverted dome, no, the lamp, the mosharabia, the carpets, etc. and the night vision. Back to the universal history of remaking. Schinkel in Tegel, Schloss Tegel, very bad quality, sorry for that. Basically reshaping a relatively modest farmhouse into a small castle, and understanding, let's say, the rules, no, of this farmhouse in order to introduce this actual symmetry, no? So the 4 towers, the crossing space in the middle, no? And here you see the only place where, let's say, the old farmhouse is still sort of emerging from the mix. Or, let's say, more recently, Piero Bottoni, an Italian modernist, having to restore in the late 30s a villa in the countryside of Modena, Villa Muggia, and transforming it into this object, which is basically the same, just much more abstracted, and in which, let's say, the ruins, the remnants of the existing architecture are like suspended, no, on top of this surreal modernist environment. And this is another competition, another project we did. We won it in 2011, and it's a building in Milan. It's a strange building. It's a tiny building, but intensely public, because it's a building about 2 tragic moments of Milanese and Italian history, no? Which were the end of Second World War, so the partisans, etc., deportations, and then the terrorist decade of the 70s and early 80s. It's called House of Memory. Program is mixed, meaning that there is an exhibition space, headquarters for the associations, 5 associations which are related to these events, and then there's a quite big archive on the end of Second World War and terrorism. I mean, it's part of this big new development, which is called Porta Nuova. American money, then Qatar entered the game. It's a small part of it. Developers had to give back 40 million euros. 3 of them were used for House of Memory. And I guess, let's say, we won this competition because we interpreted memory, or that specific memory, in a very different way than all the other competitors. At a certain moment during the development of the project, we found this image, which is it's a small box, a small wooden box, which is kept in the Vatican museums in Rome, and it's containing this, let's say, quite obscure set of bones from saints and terrain, soil from the Holy Land, no? And of course, the memory inside is fragile, is obscure, and so the cover is trying to convey the meaning, no? Or partially convey the meaning of this memory, no? With this polyptych. And we thought, okay, then we clearly have to do the same. We have to do a box, we have to do a polyptych on the facade, and we started digging into polyptychs, Piero della Francesca, glorious tradition. Of course, we were even aware that it's 21st century, we need abstraction, we need the critical distance. We looked at Gerhard Richter, and I think that was quite a turning moment, no? Meaning that looking back at the work by Gerhard Richter, we found the only political work by Gerhard Richter, which is this sequence. It's a series of big paintings showing collective scenes and small paintings showing the members of this German terrorist group, which was called Beider Meinhof. And it's in black and white. As you can see, there's the typical, let's say, blurring, the signature blurring by Gerhard Richter. And we thought, okay, that's interesting. And suddenly, let's say, this Richter blurring became for us the impossibility to remember precisely, but even the impossibility to forget. So this sort of critical distance towards the memory. A memory which is, of course, in the case of House of Memory, Casa della Memoria, still controversial and materially fragile because it's postcards, newspapers, pictures, old books, etc. So Gerhard Richter, participation process, looking at buildings with images, which of course, when I was studying, there was some buildings by Herzog de Meuron, some of them are quite beautiful, by the way. Then we found this amazing one, which is Juan O'Gorman, famous for having done studio and house for Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. Juan O'Gorman doing in Mexico City the big National Library with a windowless storage on top. So there's a big volume on top of this modernist building, windowless, decorated with these amazing murales, showing Mexican cosmogony. Framing, Bas Prinsen. We started looking at Milanese architecture because we were aware that the building was tiny, but it was important to root it into the history of Milanese architecture in order to make it part of the city from the very beginning. So Muzio, policromi, terracotta policromi, Bramante in Santa Maria delle Grazie, Filarete in Cagranda, and somehow the facade was there. So terracotta, polychromy, with this polyptych, with the small, let's say, portraits and the big collective scenes. The building is up there in the corner of the new development. The plot was as big as the building, so the building had to be a rectangle, basically. And we started looking at types. I mean, it would take too long to talk about everything, but let's say maybe it's interesting to see this one. It is a corner house in Bern, which is, of course, an interesting building because it's storage, archive to an extent, and the content is so precious for the community, so the grain for winter, which, it's often close to the town hall, it's monumental, etc., etc. Or San Michele in Florence, which is a bizarre building. It was a loggia for trading, with some storage space on top, apparently. And then it was closed off from the city and it became a church with 2 columns in the middle. And the glorious tradition of the Venetian schools, which are not schools, they are centers of power and welfare in the neighborhoods, so secondary centers of welfare and power. And they have, let's say, a typical, a very recurrent typology, which is a big room at ground floor with columns and then a monumental stairs. Somehow the plan was there. So big room, exhibition space, connected to the city at ground floor, 2 columns in the middle, as or San Michele, a big monumental stairs on the side. And the section, again with this layering of the functions, program, etc. The site was a mess at the time because they were building the big towers, Bosco Verticale, etc., etc. We didn't know where to take pictures of the models, so we thought, okay, let's go very early in the morning in Duomo Square, because it's nice and because somehow it's stating, once again, this idea of connecting to the history of the city, to the memories of the city, to the monumental buildings of the city. So we went there, Stefano Graziani took some pictures in the space. We knew we had little money, so we knew that the interior should have been essential, naked, no? And we started looking at, say, Brazilian modernism, Villanova Artigas, and again, this idea of connecting to the city. For the stairs, we thought, let's do a smaller copy of the majestic ramps of San Siro Stadium. And somehow the interior was there. And let's say this guy made us one, Cesar Pelli, which apparently entered, he told us, he entered the room, the models were there, he told the others, I really don't like it, it's not my style, but if you look for House of Memory, I think that's it. Maybe true, let's see. And then these bizarre images started appearing on newspapers. Apparently Duomo Square was a bit confusing, so they started pasting skies in the back of the House of Memory. This is the facades, the final facades after all the participation process with the associations, etc. And of course we had a problem. We didn't really know how to build it for cheap. Of course, I mean, I had a phone call, a funny phone call with Gramazio Kohler about using robots, but of course was too expensive. In the end, we prepared the files in Photoshop. We turned them into matrices with numbers. We cut the bricks in 4 pieces, no? Getting a pixel, which is 5.5 by 5.7, 12 centimeters deep. And we started doing mock-ups. And let's say the effect was satisfying, no? Meaning that that idea of this Gerhard Richter blurred effect was there. And then we printed one-to-one, and this is half of a brick, because it's the lower pattern. We printed one-to-one the entire House of Memory. We went there was a foam building, basically, no? So with gypsum ropes, no? We designed, we drew the frames, and we started gluing, you know, these papers on these sheets of paper on the wall. And basically, the workers were simply getting 6 piles of bricks behind their shoulders and placing them there. No? Final drawings, not so interesting. The biggest compromise, which was killing the terraces, moving the archive upstairs. I mean, it's a long story. And we were quite lucky with the contractor, because some parts were difficult. And here it is. Here it is, in this very bizarre environment on which on the north you have the existing city, formerly, let's say, popular neighborhood, and on the south you have vertical forest, Cesar Pelli Tower, etc., etc. Stairs, the exposed part of the archive, the offices, the cheapest installations we could find on the market. And these portraits and scenes. And here are more recent images, let's say a few years later, no, with the House of Memory in use. There it is. This is another project, again, about the idea of remaking, using what is there. It's a competition we won in Tirana. Student city, so it's the dorms for public university in Tirana. 10,000 students living in a place out of the center on the hill, which is a constellation of basically crappy buildings from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Which is basically this. What we, again, the problem here was probably doing the smallest amount of architecture in order to establish a sort of unity, a character, to discover a place. And what we discovered here was this void, which is sloping down the hill towards the center of Tirana. And we basically decided to create a long porch, which was turning this void into a formalized void, was turning this void into the lawn of the campus. And then injecting new functions, some faculties being moved there, etc., etc. And of course, we were looking at this glorious tradition. Here is Jefferson in the University of Virginia, in which you have this beautiful porch defining the lawn as the core of the life of the campus. And you have the buildings which are basically proposing themselves on top of the porch towards the lawn. Then again, Brazilian modernism, because it has to be cheap, it has to be naked, etc. Doing the types, etc. And the first tests about the integration between the new porch, the old buildings with new insulation, new types, etc. And this transitional element, which we decided to place between the old buildings and the porch in order to do the Jefferson effect, so to propose, let's say, the buildings on the loggia into the lawn. So here you see, let's say, a sort of not really realistic idea of phasing. And that's it. And a model we did for the triennial or biennial in Versailles a few years ago, of the porch with only the masks of the buildings. I mean, I will go through some other projects without really mentioning them, which we did, in which we basically are reshaping constellation of existing objects into new wholes. That was a competition for the gardens around, public space around Humboldt Forum in Berlin. It is a strategic vision for the future of Genève, Grand Genève. And that is a project for a railway yard in the north of Milan. A competition 3 years ago, I think, which we arrived third in the end, OMA won. And again, Grand Genève, student city, etc. Scalofarini in Milan. Back to the history of universal history of remaking. Gunnar Birkets in the States, a law school with a neo-Gothic campus, a new library had to be built, and what he did was digging and on the side, let's say, of the existing campus, the existing buildings, and basically creating this hidden building, which is sort of amplifying, this Gothic or neo-Gothic, in this case, idea of verticalization. And here you see it built. So with this vertigo effect, it's quite an incredible project. Let's say, a quite well-known project by Mendes da Rocha, having to deal with this Pinacothèque, no, in Sao Paulo, and basically doing a fundamental move, no, so changing the entrance from here to there, no, so using the building on the other side, no, and basically covering the courtyards, creating a system of bridges. So you see, covering the courtyards, creating these bridges, and having the building used in this direction, which is turned 90 degrees from the original one. And here you see images of the interior. A very small project for an exhibition we did in Milan. We did in Milan a few years ago. I think it was 2015. It was an exhibition about Super Studio, a bizarre exhibition with 10 artists, etc. And it was in a building by Super Studio. You all know them, continuous monument, etc., etc. It was in this space, which is a nice building by a famous Italian architect, Ignazio Gardella. It's called the PAC, Padiglione Arte Contemporanea. Built in the early 50s. And it had an interesting speciality, no? So there was these skylights, and the space was flowing down to the garden, no? Again, with this very modernistic idea of spaces flowing once into the others. Unluckily, in the early 90s, there was a bomb there. Still unclear who put it, mafia, secret services, who knows. It was a bomb, the building was quite damaged, and the son of Gardella did the renovation, the restoration, and he killed the space. He killed the space because the skylights were blocked, and then this quite flimsy ceiling in aluminium was inserted. In a way, killing this idea, no, of space and light flowing from the garden to the sky. The exhibition needed small rooms for videos, etc. We thought, okay, I mean, let's reuse this idea of the continuous monument. Let's turn the aborted, let's say, modernistic space into an enfilade, no? With two continuous monuments, left and right, and a sequence of small rooms which are combining and creating these bigger rooms out of the original structure. We started looking at how to materialize it. We looked at this early Frank Gehry housing in which gypsum boards were left, let's say, visible with this huge stucco, between them. They didn't like the stucco, so in the end it's only gypsum board. And you see the two continuous monuments, of course, adapting to the building, facing each other, exposing their, let's say, temporary nature. So there's a front and a back, somehow, and creating these odd situations between the existing and the new. And another very small project, we finished it 3 years ago. And again, it's a constellation of buildings. It's a big brewery, 2 hours drive from Milan to the north, 1 hour and a half. It's called Poretti. And they wanted at the entrance a flagship store, visitor center, so a small building which was sort of announcing, no, the complex towards the street. And I mean, inside, they are not used anymore. There were these beautiful brewing boilers, which of course they have a very fantastic shape, no, and they have this tiled base. And we started digging into this idea, no, fencing with this idea of the small circular building with a chimney, as a reminder, as a perpetuator, no, of this memory of the brewing boilers. And I guess probably the most influential projects were these two by Venturi, which is two versions of the same guest house in two slightly different places. So one is on a slope, the other one is on a flat land, but in the same garden. And somehow, let's say, the project was there. So a very small building with this elongated, vertically elongated form, with a lower section for the visitors and a higher section with light from here for the beers, no, for the shelves. And this split idea, no, this Venturi idea of splitting the building in two and exposing a side of it. Here it is, in its bizarre contest. In a way, entertaining dialogue with the big tanks, pronouncing the boilers in the old factory, and creating this split space, no, with the low space, the tall space, and this tiled core in the middle. And of course, France being France, Lacaton Vassal, the masters of remaking. But, I mean, is Swiss, but this project is in France. Bernard Tchoumi, sort of remaking a constellation of humble sheds, painting them with this goldish, yellowish, mustard-like paint, no? And then placing a roof on top of them and turning them into a system, into a whole, with this bluish distribution system which is allowing you to move around. I'm almost done. I don't want to kill you. A competition we did 3 years ago, it was still COVID, with Johnston Markley and others for the town hall in Tirana. I mean, unclear, nobody won. At a certain moment they understood that the plot was not that one. We are still waiting for any kind of response. But maybe what is interesting here is that we basically decided to ignore making a building. We decided to make a garden. Of course, the building is there, but the garden was the epicenter of the attention. So we went for the most efficient, thermally efficient, and in terms of material resources, office tower, quite a fetish tower, quite flexible. And then we put all the attentions in creating this garden, having in mind this idea of, let's say, the fact that Tirana will be increasingly harsher, no, as a climate. And basically all the attention is in this big extended public space, which is supposed to offer a sort of alternative to the big square designed and built by 51 and 40 in the center of Tirana, along the same axis. So you see here this pergola, the pots, no, for the greenery. And then, okay, we were doing it with Johnston Markley. It was COVID, it was all remote, no, and we thought, okay, they are from LA, no. Maybe what we could introduce is this, which was a fantastic project done by a guy called Jardi and a graphic designer called Susan Presma for the LA Olympic Games in '84, which were the first, let's say, Olympic Games explicitly made for broadcasting on television. So they reshaped many places in the city with this festive architecture, which is temporary. It's red, because Coca-Cola was paying for it. Its circus is Russian constructivism, is quite bizarre. The project of the 1,000 trees, etc., the seasons. The square by 51 and 40, the garden of the town hall in front of the park. This is a master plan by Grimshaw. And let's say the only visible part from the public realm of the building with this pergola is the base, no, with these columns. So we decided to use, to dress these 34 columns, starting from a reinterpretation of traditional costumes, Albanian costumes, always in the light of these LA Games of '84, Olympic Games of '84. And basically, this is the result of the 34 columns. And then the functions were divided into 3 boxes, basically. The office box, auditorium, and the council room. Of course, connected from below, and with a big nursery. This was supposed to be a nursery, providing, let's say, the greenery for the other parts of the city. Yeah, there's not much to say. Efficient facades, of course. With Bollinger Groman, we experimented with stone structures, no? So the idea of using Barrett limestone, which is nearby. We didn't manage to, at least with the first engineering screening, to produce the horizontal structures with stone, but the vertical structures were imagined in stone. And there it is, last project, a project we are busy with now. I mean, it's a very big library. It's called Biblioteca Europea di Informazione e Cultura. So it will be the new main library of Milan. There's little time to design it because it has to be finished for 26, and it's a competition we won July last year. Again, as House of Memory, there's this idea of rooting the building into the city. There's this idea of the monumental form. There's this idea of the public building. But there's even a sort of double soul, no, in the bake, in the library. Because, of course, nowadays, a library is physical, but it's even digital, no? And the brief was explicitly trying to redefine, no, how these two realities are coexisting and interfering with each other, no? So there is the forum, which is the noisy part, is the digital part, etc., and there is the traditional, let's say, the more traditional environment of the departments. So we started flirting with this idea of the double the double form. And again, looking back, Kevin Roche, Giorgio Grassi, Feltrinelli, Lacaton Vassal, a little church in Milan, which is a twin church. So basically, this was the original nave, and then after let's say disease, let's say a very rich person decided to build this second part, and then a project, an unbuilt project by Zemper for an archive, which again you have this double, let's say, form with distribution in the middle, and somehow the section is this one with this shared, let's say, shared base, an underground automated archive, and then forum, so the digital part, the noisy part, the most public part, and apartments with a greenhouse and a terrace topping them out. And then in the back, because the site, I mean, the conditions are quite difficult here. This is, under here, there's a station. So basically, this is exactly the profile which could be built. In the back, there is this smaller building for the kids' library and the auditorium. And here it is. Of course, if you want to win, and it's something that we learned on our skins, on somehow through experience. I'm not sure it's the same in here, but if you want to try winning a competition in Milan right now, you have to do a greenhouse, and the structure has to be in timber. We were working with these environmental engineers from London, friends of us, they are called Atmos, and they told us, look, timber, North Italy, nowadays, for such a building, is less friendly environmentally than concrete, weirdly enough, because we import timber. At the same time, we told them, look, there's no way. Either there's a bit of timber or the possibilities of winning are close to zero. So it's half and half. Main structures are in concrete. Secondary structures are in timber. It's a greenhouse, but supposedly a clever one, meaning that there's many ways of getting light, accumulating light and heat during winter, and there are many ways to protecting during summer. So there's a sort of grid which has a variable size, let's say, on top of the glass, and there are curtains, exterior curtains. There's a non-climatized zone which is quite big, which is all of this, which is acting as a chimney. And then you see the building in the back, this sort of imaginarium, the so-called imaginarium. And this is the big, let's say, public space, now with the entrance hall, the vertical circulation, the light from the top, forum, departments, etc. To round it off, again, Universal History of Remaking, one of the finest samples of 20th century architecture, maybe. Dolgast in Munich, having to repair, to fix the bombing of Second World War. And basically using the rubble, which was still on the spot, in order to rebuild the missing part of the building. At the same time, being perfectly aware that, let's say, it it would have been impossible, no, to redo this, impossible and way too expensive, no? So producing this sort of abstracted form of what was there. And at the same time, completely revolutionizing the way in which the building is used and experienced. Because inside, instead of having, let's say, the pre-existing situation with floors and enfilade, he basically created this grand staircase which is able to completely reshape the distribution of the building. Thank you so much.
Merci Andrea pour ce petit voyage à travers vos projets et les autres projets. Alors, bon, vous l'avez compris, c'est une manipulation comme ça de toute une série d'éléments de référence historique, d'éléments formels avec lesquels on peut jongler comme ça assez de façon étonnante. Voilà, je ne sais pas si ça vous inspire une question. Si, oui, Antoine, non, non, non. Est-ce que je peux aussi la traduire si vous n'osez pas la poser en anglais? Sinon, vous pouvez la poser en anglais. Sylvana, elle peut la poser en italien.
Moi, je voulais laisser la place aux étudiants. Pas du tout. No. Bon. Ciao. Ora ti parlo in italiano così poi loro stanno lì e dire avremmo potuto fare una domanda anche noi. Intanto grazie. Je vais parler en français, ne vous inquiétez pas. Intanto grazie di essere venuto nella nostra piccola scuola, credo che sia la più piccola in Francia. Benvenuto. Je vais faire deux choses. Tu parles français? Pas du tout? Tu le comprends? Mais tu dis oui, et donc ça veut dire que tu me comprends. Je vais juste parler avec les étudiants en te posant la question. S'il y a des passages que tu ne comprends pas, je le répète en italien. J'ai beaucoup apprécié cette présentation, cette d'énorme actualité pour ce que nous faisons ici à l'école. Et ce qu'il faut faire maintenant, c'est-à-dire repenser à ce qui est déjà là. Et en pensant à ce qui est déjà là, aussi imaginer comment notre créativité peut apporter des différences à ce qui est déjà là. On est dans une époque où cette question de qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec ce qui est déjà là est centrale. Et j'ai beaucoup aimé cette fluidité, cette manière de parcourir les strates de l'histoire, que je me permets de dire qui est typiquement italienne, avec cette nonchalance de dire, bon, je traverse l'histoire de l'époque romaine jusqu'à nos jours, avec une énorme fluidité, une légèreté, que je trouve formidable, et d'aller chercher ce qui est nécessaire pour construire un projet qui est tout à fait nouveau. Donc, comment on peut dialoguer avec cette légèreté, mais aussi avec cette profondeur de réflexion avec le passé. J'ai beaucoup apprécié ça. Et l'autre chose que j'ai appréciée et qui peut être intéressante pour les étudiants, c'est cette manière de décomposer le bâtiment, décomposer l'architecture et en reconnaître les différents éléments. Donc c'est un travail très patient, comme recomposer un puzzle où il y a plusieurs tesselles et là, à la fin, avec beaucoup de patience, beaucoup de soin, on arrive au projet final. Donc, je n'ai pas une question en particulier, j'ai juste apprécié ce travail et je félicite ce courage de encore faire l'architecture aujourd'hui, ce qui est un grand challenge, une grande difficulté. Se vuoi te lo traduco un po' quello che ho detto. Vi ho fatto un sacco di bei complimenti e ho detto che ho apprezzato molto questa questa facilità, questa fluidità nell'attraversare i vari strati della storia per andare a recuperare quello che ci serve e creare un progetto che però è nuovo. E questo è un modo di guardare al passato che non è passatista, appunto, ma che ci serve perché oggi abbiamo bisogno di fare dei progetti a partire da quello che già c'è. E questo già c'è e significa tantissime cose, quindi quando si parla di ecologia non è soltanto andarsi a cercare degli strumenti tecnologici, ma è anche andarsi a cercare una strategia di intervento che è un po', credo, quello che voi avete fatto nei vari progetti che ho visto. E poi l'altra cosa è che c'è un grande lavoro paziente di decomposizione e ricomposizione nei progetti, per cui ci sono tanti elementi che devono essere poi riassemblati, però sono distinti e devono essere riassemblati, che è un lavoro di grande pazienza, come se ci fosse un grande telaio, un grande puzzle, e questo lavoro di ricomposizione richiede molta cura e molta pazienza. Ecco. Non so se ho interpretato bene il vostro lavoro, ecco, se può esserci una domanda, dimmi se queste due angoli di attacco che ho colto sono veri.
Sì, rispondo in inglese così. No, thank you very much for the very nice words and comments. It's, I mean, how to say? I guess there are maybe two elements at play here. One is that from the very beginning and even before the office, we always used to design in groups, no? In groups of people, no? Design as a collaborative act, etc. And I'm not sure it's the same for everybody, but the only way we managed to design together was designing through other buildings. So basically, instead of starting from scratch, no, and starting, say, I imagined this, I imagined that, what we used to do from the very beginning was simply, you know, sitting down, starting to talk about the project, getting books from the shelves, and basically try to find solutions, many solutions in what we knew and what was available. And so I guess on one side, it's probably a necessity when you are dealing with many people at once, at least for us. On the other side, I personally have the feeling that it becomes increasingly important in the moment in which you say, okay, we should be ashamed in designing new buildings. We have to steer, let's say, our architectural skills, our teaching, maybe our practices from new buildings, which of course is not always easy, because then when you win a competition, you think, okay, this I should do. But somehow the moment you decide that, okay, you should slowly, no, not so slowly, by the way, move that way, I have the feeling that this idea of architecture as architectural bits, no, and pieces that you have to reshape and group together becomes probably even more important. I mean, it becomes essential to notice what is there and to be able to reimagine it, respecting what is there, but at the same time injecting new life, new intensity into it. Because there's even another element. I mean, there's you are not always dealing with masterpieces. I mean, most of the time you are dealing with crappy buildings. And so, let's say, it's extremely important. First, it's extremely important to judge everything in the same manner, no? Being it the hyper-monumental building, or, I don't know, indeed, the crappy building built in Albania in '52. And according to that, then being able to imagine a potential future, let's say, for these constellations. Yeah. Sounds like a good plan. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.